So I'd like to introduce Deanne. Deanne is from Building Biology WA, and she's a certified building biologist, geobiologist, and certified with GAPS, which is the Gut and Psychology Syndrome Psych K facilitator. She's a speaker, author, activist with more than 20 years of experience in the environmental health area. She's a practitioner and member of the Australian Society of Building Biologists. Deanne practices through Western and South Australia, the ACT and the Northern Territory, runs numerous workshops and seminars from beginner to practitioner level, and sits as an advisor on several environmental health groups. She's the founder of Building Biology WA and GeoHarmony. Welcome, Deanne. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Can you hear me okay? My
Okay,
air tube's
great.
in okay? Alrighty. So trying to talk about 5G in a 30-minute slot is pretty tough, but I think the most effective thing that I can, or the most important thing that I can get across to you is what 5G is actually going to look like. So 5G technology and mitigation solutions, that's what we're going to spend the next 30 minutes looking at. Try and make it as entertaining as I possibly can. So I guess what we're looking at is the elephant in the room. I think, you know, we've gone beyond this point of, you know, being able to ignore the science, being able to ignore common sense. It's getting to a point where we know that this is an issue, and it's still going ahead with the rollout. So there's a lot of things and a lot of reasons why people are really angry with this. And especially as we start going through what the actual infrastructure looks like, we're going to understand why 5G is so much more of an issue. The other thing is that I've worked in this field for a long time now, and I work with so many people who are really affected by EMF exposure, whether that be from magnetic fields, dirty electricity, radio frequencies. The issue is that they're not getting acknowledged for the health symptoms that they're experiencing. And last year I was lucky enough to go to the States for the EMF medical conference, and it was amazing to see so many doctors there discussing how they're actually treating patients from electrohypersensitivity. And it's just incredible that we're still at a point worldwide that we're not recognising this. So the workshop itself, we're going to look at our current exposures, the 5G infrastructure itself, how that's going to increase our exposure and what that's actually going to look like. And then we're going to focus on some mitigation solutions for both our current and future exposures. So we are electrical beings. We are not designed to be in this sea of radiation. We have evolved to live amongst a very small range of electrical frequencies. Those frequencies can barely be found anywhere on Earth now, which is very concerning. So this is what we call electrical or electric pollution, or electropollution, and the reason being is that it doesn't benefit health, or it takes away health from our, our flora and fauna to ourselves. So I'm sure you've seen before the electromagnetic spectrum. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but I am going to talk a little bit about some of the terms that get thrown around. So electromagnetic fields is a term that is very, very loosely used. I tend to use it for people in the beginning because it's something that they've heard before. But electromagnetic fields encompass a diverse range of magnetic fields that exist everywhere throughout our environment. The electromagnetic spectrum, which I showed you before, encompasses both natural and human sources of electromagnetic fields, which is why it's a term that I don't like to use too much, because we rely on the electromagnetic field that comes off the earth for our body to sync. It's what we've evolved to. You know, anyone that's looked into things like grounding knows that, you know, there are frequencies out there that are incredibly beautiful. So really what we're looking at is what we call NNEMF, or non-native EMFs. And this refers to, like I say, in that electropollution, so the man-made electric fields that aren't conducive to good health. Then you'll hear often the term non-ionizing radiation. Non-ionizing radiation refers to a range of radiation that does not have enough energy to ionize or remove an electron or an atom from a molecule. Now, this is an argument that people constantly raise, and the reason being is that it's kind of the only argument that they can raise. Now, my issue is there are so many things in our environment, and as a building biologist, we look at all sorts of things from mold to allergens, chemicals, pesticides. They don't have the ability to remove an electron. It does not mean that they can't cause harm. And that kind of argument is so flawed because you're not looking at any other form of impact, whether it be biologically or physically to the body. Radio frequency, or RF, is any of the electromagnetic frequencies that lie in the range extending from around 3 kilohertz to 300 gigahertz. So radio frequency radiation is what we're talking about when we're talking about 5G. I put this slide up just to kind of show there are so many people that want conclusive studies that the exposure that we've got right now is going to harm us. And if you can just try and imagine how hard it is to create a study that allows or encompasses for things like you know, all these different exposures, the length of exposures, the synergistic effect when you've got perhaps a laptop sitting next to a wireless router, sitting next to a cell phone, and they're all using different frequencies. It doesn't take into effect things like what is your copper level in your body, what are different heavy metals in the body, are you that kind of atopic person, have you had previous exposures to things like mold or pesticide exposure or something that's weakened the immune system, you know, what is your nutrition like, all these sorts of things. There's no way that we can even create a study that's going to be able to show us how these kind of things impact on that synergistic level. The other thing is that, and I'm sure that James spoke about this earlier, was that the testing that we do have is on a 100-kilo male, healthy male. And I just might add there that given the current situation, or the coronavirus or COVID-19 situation that we're in at the moment, if we only showed a study that was based on a 100-kilo healthy male, we wouldn't be locked inside our homes right now. So just how much radiation are we exposed to? And I did hear James mention this one earlier, but in the past 5 years, the amount of radiation that we are exposed to has increased by a quintillion times. So just to get that number into your head, that is a 1 followed by 18 zeros. Now, in the past 25 years, we've had 1,000 billion-fold increase in our exposure. There is nowhere on Earth that we can be without electropollution. There is not a single place at sea, in a rainforest, that we cannot pick up electropollution. So we basically are the crest. If you've seen this experiment done, you'll understand what I'm talking about. The experiment's done using crest, putting it next to a router and one away from the router and seeing how it grows. Obviously, we're not quite as sensitive as crest. We don't wilt when we go outside, but you can understand that there are all these biological effects happening that we don't understand. We are aging ourselves, we are wearing our bodies down, and we are creating a huge amount of stress from our current exposures already. For those that are now homeschooling their kids, I highly recommend this as a little activity to do. So James already spoke about the health effects, so I'm not going to go into them too much, but what we do know, it interferes with DNA repair mechanism, it enhances the effects of carcinogenic chemicals, so that's that synergistic effect, enhances oxidative damage, increases the incidence of brain tumours, especially if exposed to chemicals, leads or pesticides at the same time. It affects melatonin production, increases the permeability of the blood-brain barrier and the placenta, and can affect calcium, which is the most regulated mineral in the body, by affecting how it is regulated on a cellular level. Now, those things aside, we can't really see those things in the body. So I want to take a sec to just I guess, relay what I see in my clients when it comes to electromagnetic field exposure and how they are when we remove that exposure. So the first thing that they notice generally is that their sleep patterns change. For those that experience a lot of anxiety, you know, they will notice that the body starts to relax a lot more, that they're not getting sort of heart palpitations, they're not getting that kind of muscle aches and pains, a little bit more energy, that their energy levels are more stable throughout. And they'll also find that any other exposures that they've had, that they start responding to treatment a hell of a lot better. So what happens then is that if I've got a mold client or someone who's been exposed to pesticide or chemicals, and we're all exposed to a huge amount of pollutants and chemicals and toxicants on a daily level, that their bodies, once we remove or reduce that exposure, are able to start detoxifying much faster, which means that the body's able to heal a lot quicker than it normally would. So why is 5G so different? Why is it so different to everything else that we have been bathing in for what is years now? Firstly, the infrastructure is going to change. 5G will be a net addition to the 4G light wireless infrastructure. The 5G data transmission depends upon real-time locating of a wireless handheld device by 4G signals before requesting 5G data transmission to be wirelessly beamformed to the device on hand. So what that means is that, say I've got a mobile phone in my hand, that phone is going to then send a message to a 4G cell, and then it is going to tell, the 4G cell is going to tell the 5G cell to send a direct beam to my phone of a higher frequency so that I can actually get that transmission and faster download. So for that to happen, I have to enable that 5G and I have to request that 5G. The high speed and we're going to talk more about that. The high speed relies on wireless telecommunication facilities, or WTFs. I quite like the abbreviation for that because that is the abbreviation, especially in the States, that they use for small cells. I'm sure we all know what WTF stands for. And those facilities, so the small cells that connect to the back end of the cell companies via fibre optics. So the introduction of the small cells is probably my biggest concern, and the reason being is that they're going to be so close together. We're looking at every 200 to 300 metres, some say between every 2 to 10 light poles. Everyone seems to have a different idea on how far they're going to be, and I think that the truth is, until they actually start rolling them out and understanding how they actually work, because there are so many factors that impact the effectiveness of the transmission, that I think we'll get a better understanding of it then. The antennas that emit millimetre waves to be part of the heavily 4G reliant infrastructure. So I guess that's probably what people have heard about the most, is this whole concept of millimetre waves. Now, if you can see the little picture on there, you'll see that you've got one of the towers which looks a little bit like, if you think of it as a bit of a sprinkler, so it's got the transmissions coming out everywhere, and then you've got another one which is coming out in direct beams. Now, the more data that we transmit wirelessly, the greater the electropollution that we create. So how do we solve that? We solve that by making sure that the majority of the data that we are transmitting is going through fibre optics. Now, you can imagine what some areas are going to be like. There are going to be absolute hotspots that a lot of people who are electrically hypersensitive will not be able to go in. And with the increased exposure, you'll find that a lot of people will start to really notice that they become more electrically sensitive. And when people reach a certain point, it's very hard for them to come back from being that. And generally what we see is that they become more and more sensitive to a wider range of frequencies at lower and lower exposure levels. So as we increase the frequency, we reduce down the size of the wave. So 15 gigahertz is about 20 millimetres. We currently don't use a lot of millimetre waves. Much of the 5G that is currently advertised isn't going to use the millimetre waves. The real problem that we face is the densified area antennas. So they're going to be primarily the 4G antennas. They're the ones that they're looking to put absolutely everywhere. You know, thousands upon thousands of them along your streets, on the front of your home. And And these 4G frequencies will transmit continuously, with the 5G frequencies transmitting upon request using a 16-degree beam that concentrates the energy around about 160 times from the maximum antenna output. So again, what that's saying is that we're going to have these antennas that are literally just going to be there. They're just going to be emitting all the time, exactly the same way that a cell tower does now. And then we're going to have another set that's going to concentrate these millimeter waves because they are so hard to send any distance, that they need a huge amount of power behind them, and basically they've got to be concentrated into a beam, especially if they're looking to penetrate anything. So continuous transmission such as 4G light from such close proximity to homes will be the biggest concern initially. And I'm going to go through what we kind of understand as to how we're going to mitigate those as well. So rural and low income areas will see a far slower rollout if the infrastructure is successful. And I do have a lot of doubts around that. I'm not sure why in a country setting that you would put a small cell when you're probably only going to get halfway up the driveway. So when we look at what we're actually going to be exposed to, there are two kind of categories in terms of the radio frequency exposure that we're going to be exposed to. So we have what we call a sub-6 category, which is the low to mid band. So that's anything in the 6 gigahertz and down frequency. So that's basically everything that we are currently using from 2G through to 4G and a lot of the existing, the new 5G. So the good thing about this, which is again the majority of the infrastructure, is that it can be easily measured. We definitely have the meters to do that. It can be effectively shielded with the existing materials that we have. And I already do that as a building biologist for people for things like phone towers, smart meters, things like that. The bandwidth is potentially being exhausted, which is the reason why they're looking to go into that higher bandwidth, as well as some of the other features that that gives. But with the new technology that they're looking at and the change in the actual structure of the antennas that they're using, you will find that they're kind of upgrading a lot of that, which will mean that that lower bandwidth will be able to potentially take more, be able to transmit more data. That sub-6 category can pass through walls and windows. It's not slowed by air or moisture or rain. It can travel for miles. My closest phone tower is over 5.5 kilometres away, and I still get phone reception, and we have a huge amount of trees around us. So, you know, it is very effective at transmitting data. When we look at the, and it is still impacts health incredibly, and we need to not forget that, and that's still going to be our biggest exposure that we need to be mitigating. Then we've got the super high or the super 20 high band. This becomes quite hard to measure, and I'm going to go into why our meters can't do that. We have limited shielding experience and materials in that level, but we do have some shielding materials that we're starting to work with and understand how they function at those higher levels. This bandwidth has a lot of limitations. It is very, very hard to transmit. It has very weak signal propagation and is easily blocked or slowed. You may have seen people talking about how they've had to take down trees and things in certain urban areas for this to happen. You know, non-tinted glass blocks these waves by around about 55%, drywall blocks at about 75%. The 60 gigahertz is absorbed by air. You know, it will still transmit, but it slows it down. The 24 gigahertz, you've got heavy rain. You've also got plant foliage, vehicles, dense populations of people. These are all things that need to be sorted out with this infrastructure that I don't think we really understand until it is rolled out. However, because of the issues with it being blocked so easily, this is why we're looking at doing, well, we are doing beam forming. Now, the other reason for beam forming is that if you can imagine you've you've got a signal that you're trying to push out, and you need to put so much energy behind it for it to go, that basically what happens is that the tower itself uses so much power. So they can't have it going out all the time. Instead, what needs to happen is it just goes out as it's used, which is kind of a good thing for us, because as opposed to a normal tower that's just constantly emitting, this is only emitting when it's requested. So it's kind of like a little bit like a torch or a flashlight versus a floodlight. One is designed to just shoot in a 16-degree beam. The other one comes out a little bit like a sprinkler and just kind of goes everywhere. So can we measure this? In short, the lower sub-6 band, absolutely, we can shield it, we can do all sorts of things with it. But the higher the bandwidth, when we start going above 20 gigahertz, no, we can't with existing meters, basically because those signals are out of range of what we building biologists call total incidence power density, RF meters and detectors. And we would need to spend in the likes of, sort of 15 or so grand on a spectrum analyzer in that range. And then what we're looking at is that because these are only emitted when they're requested, we'd have to stand there and, try and emit it. They're not there all the time, and it makes it really hard for us to measure. So ideally, we want to keep those frequencies in a range that we can work with. That's my face most days at work when I come in and work out how I'm going to mitigate this for my sensitive clients. So if we look at some of the protection strategies that we've got, we are already saturated in 3G, 4G, 4G Lite, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, as well as smart meters and a plethora of other devices that people have in their homes. Now, it is my job to go into people's homes and measure what their exposures are. And it's pretty scary. And the vast majority of exposure is what someone brings into their home. Now, I've only got a limited amount of time, so I'm not going to go in depth in that unless I've got a little bit of time at the end. But the information, there is information on mitigating radio frequencies in your home on multiple websites. There is so much available. I also have put up a link on my Facebook page and on my website, as I'm doing a series of free educational workshops or videos that anyone can watch and share. These will cover how to hardwire your home, what router to choose, to do things like these little guys, if you can see it. These are awesome to hardwire your mobile phone, how to hardwire your devices, safe tech, smart meters. We're going to go through step by step, and it's all going to be free, and you'll get the links to where to get everything, what you've got to do. Super easy, you don't need to be tech savvy. There's a link on my website, and there's also, the best thing to do is to actually subscribe, and then you'll get them with the links, but they'll be posted on the Facebook page as well. The next thing we need to consider is that the existing infrastructure is not going anywhere. So what are we going to do about that? Because this is, we're at a point where we know that this is harming our health. We've got a cancer latency period of between 25 and 30 years. We need to reduce the exposure. We definitely need to reduce our exposure because potentially the exposures that are outside of our controls are going to increase dramatically. So for looking for towers, I suggest that people jump on the RFNSA website. What you can do, and you can see up the top there, is if you put in your area, and you can put in your direct street address, and then put near address, click near address, and you'll find that it'll show you how many meters away each of the towers are, so that you know where they are. You can see what direction they are. You can see how many are there, and you'll also be able to see, like in this side, if you can see the little one circled in red, which is blue, is a proposed tower. Those are the ones you want to really start taking action on. You can also sign up on there and request that you get notifications when something's being proposed in your area. But if you look at all of the 5G towers that are existing already, you'll see that they're all in that sub-6 category. The other thing, and this is something that I suggest with any of my super sensitive clients, 5G will be deployed in the most dense urban areas first, where the highest concentration of subscribers exist. They're not about to trial it out in the middle of nowhere. If you are someone who is super sensitive, you need to take that seriously, and I would be definitely moving away from the more dense urban areas. That'll be me. I'll see you in the country. We'll all live together, hold hands and sing Kumbaya. And the beaming of the 4G and 5G signals at the sub 6 gigahertz and the super 20 gigahertz from small cell antennas outside of our home, obviously that is a huge concern, and the solutions there. So beamforming is narrow and on demand. So what that means is that if you're not requesting it in your home, so you're not using a 5G enabled device that is asking that to come into your home, then it's not going to. Now, if your neighbours are using their Wi-Fi, it will not beam either, because it would naturally go Wi-Fi first over cellular data. If visitors enter with a handset, for example, then it will go, and they're not on that Wi-Fi system, then it will beamform and it will get that connection going. So basically what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're not getting those devices, that we're not requesting that 5G, and you can disable that if you have already got a phone that has 5G on it. We want to avoid new generation routers. We've already had the smart routers come in. There's a whole plethora of new routers that are coming. We've got 5G routers that emit at different frequencies. There's so many things going on. When I say 5G routers, I do not mean the 5 gigahertz that is on a normal router now. That is something completely different. That is literally 5 gigahertz. We have so, you know, avoiding, like I say, the routers, wireless access points, smart speakers. Any smart device should not be in your home if you're concerned or you're trying to achieve a low EMF home. We need to create demand for these products, for safer products. Then they are currently available, but what I would like to see is that more people are asking for TVs that can disable the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth, and don't have, you know, Zigbee and all these different technologies in them. We need to be asking for the devices that, or the adapters that we can use to hardwire and connect things better. We need to be demanding and creating a demand for phones that don't have 5G on them. The more that the community and the more that society asks for these things, the more that's going to be available to us. And I've seen, you know, it's becoming harder and harder to get speakers that don't have these things. So it's really important that we're making a point of, when we're going out and purchasing new products that are going to come into our homes, that we make sure that we're not buying them with these applications on them. Now, in that sub 6 category that I was talking about, which is the vast majority of the infrastructure, and just as I talk on how much of the infrastructure is wireless, it's really only about between 5 and 10%. The majority is cabled. It's just that last existing infrastructure that's causing and creating the issue. And we should be asking for wide solutions in that area. Now, there are a number of shielding strategies that we can use. A lot of the existing materials that we have will work for the sub 6. So we've got shielding paints, we've got bed canopies, we've got all sorts of things that we can use for, you know, our existing infrastructure. We've got some of those will be effective for the higher range frequencies, not so much any of the mesh products, because the mesh is too wide. You know, people use things like metal fly screens. Again, those sorts of things won't work because the weave is just too wide for them. But we have had some success with things like some of the window tints, some of the aluminium building foil, some of the copper products, and they will slow these things down. And as we start to use and see and we can actually play with these exposures, we're going to be able to understand it better. But I guess the gist of what I'm trying to say is that the majority of the exposure that we're going to have is in a category that we've worked with for a very long time. We're very well versed at shielding for it and mitigating it. But what does need to happen is that, and a lot of people don't understand this, is that you cannot shield a house that has a high level, or any level really, of internal radio frequencies going around. So if you think that you know, that these shielding products are going to be able to save you while you've still got Wi-Fi and you're still using mobile phones in the house, you know, you've not got corded phones, you've not hardwired your laptop, your iPad, things like that, which can be easily done, then you're not going to be able to use these shielding products in that way. We've also looked at quite a few different types of Faraday cages. They're a little bit different to obviously the bed canopies, but ones that we can use in areas so that the body can get periods of rest. I haven't seen any of for the higher range that can be easily grounded as yet, but I'm sure that they're coming. So I think I'm almost up for time now, but I'm just going to run through these super quickly. Internet, there are so many ways, and again, I encourage you to jump on the 10-part series educational videos as we go through each of these step by step. But hardwiring your internet, a lot of people tell me they don't have the money to put the ports through, or they're in a rental. They don't need to do that. There's a lot of ways that you can hardwire. You can go direct from the router. You can use powerline, internet over powerline adapters. A lot of people bring up that that creates increased dirty electricity. I've measured that a lot, and I think that the level it increases is quite minimal, and the effects of reducing the exposure far outweigh the small increase in dirty electricity. You want to turn off the wireless capabilities of your router. Don't just hardwire and then leave your router emitting. You'll also need to do that for your devices as well. And if you have devices that don't have Ethernet ports, that's not an issue. There are so many adapters we can use on the market. I could talk forever on safer mobile phone use, but I really encourage people to use air tubes. Phones should be in flight mode whenever possible, and most definitely in the car. They should never ever be on the body or near your head. End of. Children should not use mobile phones at all. If that's what you need to use, or you're downloading things, then I highly encourage you to use something like a tablet and hardwire that and use it in flight mode. You'll still get full internet, but it won't be emitting. We spend on average 90% of our time indoors. In theory, 90% of our exposure is in our control. One of the reasons why I've put out the free educational series right now is because now is the perfect time for us to be reducing our exposure if you have not already done so, because our outside exposures are lowered because we're stuck in our own homes. A lot of us are setting up, you know, offices and working from home. We've got kids learning from home. You know, we can just about get so much of our exposure down to very, very low, which means that how we're going to feel and the impacts of reducing the exposure are going to be amplified. So there'll be a lot of people saying, oh my God, I slept like a baby for the first time in forever. So again, caught it, turn off the, have we asked if you turned off the emitting capabilities? What time of day are we using things? So again, you know, we shouldn't be using things late at night. We should be mindful of artificial light. Happy to, if anyone has any questions about that, I could talk about that. Are we purchasing safe things? And a lot of people talk about what else is on the market. I see it come up all the time. Basically, the only real solution is to remove the source. We don't know, we cannot measure effectively what impact these things have on the body. I have worked with electrically sensitive people for many years, and there is nothing on the market that I have seen work for everyone, which means it's not capturing all biological or physiological impacts on the human body. The only way that those people see relief is to completely remove the source. Now, people will have different experiences with different things. My opinion is this: if you can remove it, do so. If you can't, you absolutely can't, then absolutely look at different things, but you need to make sure that 100% you are not sleeping in that exposure, and every other exposure that you have has been reduced. I'm not going to go into those. The other thing is that with the increased exposure, we need to make sure that we're covering all other environmental exposures. We're increasing our microbiome diversity, which does not include constantly putting antibacterial lotions all over us. That we're healing the gut, we're limiting external exposures wherever we can. We're taking the time to ground the body and allow the body to understand that that electromagnetic field that it can now get in contact with when we're barefoot on the ground still does exist, and the world is still a safe place. Meditate and remove as many big exposures as you can. And I love this saying because it's so true. We do what we do most of the time so we can go with the flow some of the time. My home is EMF free, my office is EMF free. I cannot change the fact that I go into people's homes that do have some exposures. That is a chosen exposure given what I do. And most bodies will be able to take that. So for what I really want to get across is that really consider making sure that your home becomes your sanctuary, and you do absolutely everything that you can in your power to stop the small cells going in, because it's going to be very expensive to shield and mitigate in most homes. Any other questions I'm happy to take.